My name is Cheryl West. My date of birth is 5/20/59. I was born in Fayetteville at Washington Regional Medical Center. My parents were Wilfred and Rita Thompson.
We want to be sure that we have your permission to reprint this interview. This is for the Prairie Grove Oral History Project.
Yes.
And tell me about your family and your siblings.
I have one sister, Charlotte, and my parents, Wilfred and Rita Thompson. My mom worked for Dr. Calvin Bain until my sister was born, and then she became a stay-home mom, and my dad worked for Farmers and Merchants Bank for 45 years.
Tell me a little bit about your dad's work at the bank.
Well, he was vice president of the bank, and some of the stories I remember about my dad being at the bank, and it shows a changing in the time. On weekends, it was very common for someone to call and say, in Fayetteville, I found a car or a truck, I'm going to get it. And he'd say, fine, come in Monday and we'll take care of the paperwork. And that's certainly something that can't be done now. But, you know, I pretty much grew up with the bank.
Did you do anything to help in your parents' jobs?
Well, my dad also had a farm in Ray's Mill, and I loved going to the farm with him, and I think that's where I have my love for the farm life. But we also worked out there as well.
Tell me more about working on the farm.
Well, that's where I learned to drive a tractor, and which I love, and you know, putting in a garden and having cattle and the whole bit. So.
What other jobs did you work when you were a kid growing up in Prairie Grove besides working on the farm to help your dad and mom?
Well, you may find this really funny, but I actually had 5 yards that I mowed. I love to mow, and so I took care of 5 yards. And then when I got older, I worked at the bank during the summers, and then whenever I got out of school, I worked there as well.
Tell me about you working at the bank. What would you do and what was it like?
Well, I worked in the bookkeeping department first, where we actually filed checks by hand and ran the proof machine. We had to proof things, and we had to post the statements. And then I went on to be a teller, and I loved being a teller. I loved working with the people and the customers that came in.
Describe some of your family routines at home when you were growing up. What would y'all do around the house and around dinner table and stuff?
Well, that was a time that everybody was home for dinner. You know, there's always a big meal at dinner time. And my sister was a great cook. I was not growing up, so she would cook and I would clean up. So that always worked out well. And of course, just all the things that you do growing up to help in the house. And then, like I say, when my dad, that was back when the bank closed at 3 o'clock and school was out at 3, and so I would rush home and go with him to the farm.
What were your favorite jobs on the farm besides driving the tractor? What other stuff would you do?
Whatever I needed to do, I just loved it all. I just loved the farm life and whatever I needed to do.
What about help around the house, helping your mom take care of the house? What would you do to help her?
Whatever. Dust, clean, mow the yard, take care of the flowers.
So you said you like yard work.
Yes, I do. I love to mow, and I love to work with the flowers.
Tell me about your earliest memories of going into Prague Grove.
Well, we actually lived in Prague Grove, and then we had our farm in Ray's Mill. So, you know, it was a time of when you could ride your bike and be out until dark, and it was not a big problem. And going downtown to do whatever, you know, there's so many memories of downtown. Harlan's 5 and Dime. You would go in and there would be these long tables full of all kinds of treasures for a child to look at, where Lou Clayton and Ethel Speedland would be working in there. And Burl and Nina Horton had the Texaco station down where RVS Bank, Auto Bank is now. And Burl and Nina were like grandparents to us, and they had an ice house in the back. And my mother was a great cook and was always having people over. Our house was a place that lots of get-togethers, and it was not uncommon for every weekend for us to have homemade ice cream. And you would always go to Burl and Nina's and get a block of ice out of the ice house and chop it up and make homemade ice cream.
Tell me about going to school in Prairie Grove.
It was the best. Being from a small town and going to a small school where you know everybody and know the teachers and the administrators, it was the best.
What was it like going to school? I mean, what all would you do?
Well, I played baseball, softball, and then I was a cheerleader all through school, and was active in most things, and it was just a great school, and it still is a great school.
Tell me about some of your classmates and friends from Prairie Grove School.
Oh my goodness. Well, Karen Crawley was a good friend. She was in our class. Carrie Bartholomew. Oh my goodness, I could go on and on. Bonita Tyree. A lot of these people are still here in town, which I think speaks highly of our school system and our community.
Who are some of the teachers you remember?
Barbara Ireland, who is Barbara Steele now, was my all-time favorite. She was our cheerleading sponsor and was a great teacher. I think everybody would say that.
Tell me about some of your neighbors where you lived in Prairie Grove and some of your family's friends.
Well, we lived on a street that we were about the only kids other than the Jordans who lived down. We lived on Kate Smith, and we really didn't have a lot of kids up and down the street. But I grew up with Karen and Susan Parks, and we were together a whole lot and still are.
What do you remember about the town and the people back in those days compared to that would be different from now?
You knew everybody. Like I said, as a small child, you could go downtown by yourself, and of course Dad was always in the bank, but you would know everybody. Excuse me. You would know the people in the stores. You could go into Carmen's drugstore and see Miss Carmen, and the one place that I guess when we were in high school that we hung out was Burger Quick, which was east of Daisies and Olives. It's part of the Daisies and Olives building, but it was a hamburger place, and that's where you would go to see your friends. And during that time, you would drag Main. You would go from Dillon's parking lot down to the Lions station and just drive back and forth and visit with your friends. And it was a very laid back, calmer time, but it was wonderful. It was our own little Mayberry.
Tell me about your family's church routine.
Oh, it was every Sunday, First Presbyterian Church. You would go, and if there was anything going on, we would be there.
Was that a big social social center where you met a lot of people? And
sure, we
friends?
had a at the time a big youth group there, and yeah, it was a great time to go and visit with people.
Back when you were a kid growing up in Prairie Grove, what would you and your friends do for fun?
Well, ride our bikes. Like I said, you could go anywhere and just be together. You would go to someone's house. Our house seemed to be a place that most of our friends would come and hang out and visit. And it wasn't a time of everybody sitting on the couch playing with their phone. You visited, you talked, you had fun.
What did your parents and their friends do for fun and social activity in those days?
Well, they would, of course, go out to eat or play games. We would play games, and people would just come over and, like I said, just talk.
What do you remember your oldest memories of the Battlefield Park?
Clothesline Fair. Back then, of course, like it is now, everyone square danced. The Lions Club built a big stage on the side of the Latta Barn, and that's where we square danced. And at the time, the Lions Club had a huge pit built by the Jim Park shelter where they fixed barbecue chicken dinners, and they were wonderful. And as time went on, I think the health department shut them down because of the open pit, I guess. But that was a really big deal, the Labor Day celebration.
How many kids in Prairie Grove participated in the square dancing? How big a deal was that?
It was big. It's nothing compared to now. You started probably at 6 o'clock and you were probably over by 8, whereas now it's several hours of dancing. But everybody was involved in Labor Day.
Tell me about the history of the park, what you remember, how it's changed over the years.
Well, it's getting bigger. You know, they're acquiring more land, and it's getting bigger all the time. And we're very fortunate to have the park here. I think a lot of people that live here probably take it for granted and maybe not use it as much as people coming in from out of town.
Tell me about your husband and his family and y'all's family.
Okay. Well, I married my high school sweetheart, Randy West, and we have twin girls, Natalie and Lindsay, and his folks, Frank and Judy West. We live on the farm that they have. Our girls are the 5th generation. It's been in the family since 1860, before the Civil War. His grandmother, actually his great-grandmother, I'm sorry, has a written account of the Civil War, the Battle of Prairie Grove, because the house that she was in, the house that my husband grew up in, was used for a Northern Army hospital. And so she was able to sit on the hill and watch the battle.
Tell me more about the park. Weren't you and your family involved in helping them expand the park?
Yes. I don't know how much I want to go into that.
Okay, you don't have to. Tell me, you were a long-time member of the Prague Grove School Board. Tell me what years you served, and then a little bit about your time on the school board and the changes you saw at the school.
Okay. I was on the board, at the Prairie Grove School Board, for 14 years. And I really enjoyed being on the school board and working with different aspects of acquiring land. You know, years ago, in the it's probably in the late 50s, the school board at the time had the insight to purchase all the land where the school is now, where most of the school is now. And at the time, that was, you know, way out on the edge of town. But by doing that, it had enabled the school to stay together. We don't have part of the school on the south part of town and part of it on the north part of town. And then while I was on the board, we purchased the land where the new high school is. And the current school board has purchased the land across from the high school. So in doing that, to have the insight to plan for the future is huge. And I think that's a very good move. One of the strong points that I think our school has had is we've always had strong teachers and administrators, and one of the strong things that the school has is that the community supports them. You know, you ask for a millage and they're there to support the school.
What years were you on the school board? Approximately, if you can remember.
Well, let's see. Oh my gosh. It was through the 90s. I got off in 2002.
So maybe late 80s.
80s, yeah. It would have been. It would have been like 1990, I think, was when I first got on. I was appointed. A gentleman had decided he was going to get off, and I was appointed, and then ran and was on it.
Tell me about the changes at the school facilities while just in the time you were on the board. What all do you remember?
Oh, well, the school had started growing rapidly, and it was obvious that more room was going to be needed, and that was something that you just constantly worked with. You know, you only had so much money to work with, and so that's what you used to build. And so adding on and building the new high school was huge, something that was needed very much.
Tell me about the school's relationship with the city and the community.
Oh, I think that the school and the community and the city have always worked well together. You know, they worked together years with the baseball fields and things like that. But in a small town, you've got to work well together, and that's something that I think we've done well.
Let's talk about that. The city or the school had reached the point where you didn't really have enough baseball facilities, and there was nowhere really on school property to build them. And then the city decided to build some at Reef Park.
Reef Park.
So talk to me, kind of walk me through that. What you can remember.
Well, that all happened after, the Reef Park was done after I got off the board. So I'm not sure how all that came about, but it is true that there was not room for the facility that is at Reef Park now, and so it had to be moved.
Who are some of the superintendents you can remember working with while you were on the school board?
Well, I worked with Tommy Tyler. He was the superintendent when I first got on, and then when he resigned, Tom Laux came on, and they both did a great job.
Who are some of the other school board members that I know you worked with a lot of them, but who are some of the ones that you worked with that you can tell me about?
Well, Stevie Bartholomew was on there. I worked with John Robert Hart for a while, Rick Reed, Claude Nations, oh my goodness, Claude Rutherford. I'm drawing a blank here.
If you met someone that didn't know anything about Prairie Grove, and they said, Cheryl, tell me about your hometown of Prairie Grove, what would you tell them?
I would say it's the most wonderful little town that you could ever come to, where everybody knows each other, where everybody is willing to help. Something that's always surprised me about Prairie Grove, doesn't really surprise me, but I think it's something very special. If there's someone in need, medical issues, or their house burned, whatever it may be, this community has always been so willing to come together for a fundraiser, and it's been unbelievable the amount of money that our town can raise to help someone in need. But I think that is a very strong point, that we are willing to help each other.
Can you think of any examples of that?
Well, Coach Mike Green. Everybody loved Coach Green, and the town came together for him. There's several examples of people. There's been recently a minister in town that was having some health issues. The town came together and supported him with what he needed. But it's a wonderful place to live.
Are there any other stories about Prairie Grove or the area that you can think of to tell that maybe you haven't thought of?
Well, Prairie Grove, I was actually standing in the parking lot when the water tower fell. That's always been a big thing that hit Prairie Grove. Of course, the water tower did not fall where they wanted it to. It fell on top of Crescents. I have pictures. I can show you that. When I was growing up, you didn't really need to go to Fayetteville a lot. You went to the doctor here. You went to Dr. Baggett. You went to Dr. Calvin Bain for a dentist. Everything you needed was here, or so we thought. We thought this was all that you needed. I don't know.
Tell me about the water tower. How big of a deal was that?
It was a huge deal at the time. Of course, when they were going to have it fall, it was going to fall right in the parking lot, and it was not going to be a big deal. But for whatever reason, it fell right on top of Crescents. Made a mess.
Cheryl, tell me more about the Trades Day and the activities that the kids would do during Trades Day.
Well, once a year during Trades Day, we would have a Kitty Day parade, and everybody would dress up however you wanted to. You would lead your dog, you'd dress your dog up, ride your bike, whatever, and there would be a huge parade of kids going down Main Street.
How many kids were involved? How big a deal was that?
Oh my, I don't know that I could give you a number, but being a small child, it seemed like a lot. I would think there would be probably 50 kids there. It was big.
Tell me a little bit more. You mentioned earlier about the square dancing. Tell me more about that.
Well, we square danced in front of the Latta Barn. It would be an all-day thing for the Lions Club guys to go in and build a stage. It was a huge stage, and it's hard to imagine that now with the thousands of people that come to watch square dancing now. But we would square dance on a stage, and it was something all the kids did.
Tell me more about your family.
Well, my mom and dad is Wilfred and Rita Thompson. My mom worked for Dr. Bain, Dr. Calvin Bain, until my sister was born, and my dad worked at the Farmers Merchants Bank for 45 years. I have one sister, Charlotte, and married my high school sweetheart, Randy, and we have 2 girls, Natalie and Lindsay, and 2 wonderful son-in-laws, Colt and Byron, and we have 3 precious grandsons. We were very involved as a family in the bank because my dad was there, I worked there, my sister worked there, and our daughter Natalie worked at the bank, and she's still in banking. And I also serve on the board, the Arvest Bank board.
Okay, and you had mentioned earlier some of the school board members that you were involved in. Tell me more about that. Who were some of the others or the school board members you remember working with?
I worked with Steve Bartholomew, Larry Crawley, Rick Reed, Claude Rutherford, Sarah Agee, Ron Stinchcomb was on there for a while, John Robert Hart. It was a good group of people.
Tell me about your family, your grandparents too, and some more about your family.
My grandparents, the Thompson grandparents were farmers. They lived on a farm, and my mother's folks, Fred and Ruth Passley, lived in Prairie Grove. And my husband's family, Frank and Judy West, and they lived on the farm that we live on today. And Frank also had the hardware store in Prairie Grove, Farmers Hardware. And Judy stayed on the farm and worked.
Tell me about the Farmers Hardware. What all would people come in there and buy?
Well, as I remember it, it pretty much had everything. You could get plumbing supplies, electrical supplies. You could get a washing machine, furniture, I think. It pretty much had everything you might need.